Thank you very much, Heather. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. We are very pleased to have two amazing speakers for us today to help give us some current thoughts and best practices about mentoring and nurturing junior faculty. Our two panelists are Sarah Peniston-Dorland, who's at the University of Maryland in the Geology Department, where she is very interested in studying the processes that occur with subduction zones, and Tracy Holloway, who is a professor in the Nelson Institute of Environmental Studies at the University of Medicine, and she's very much interested in working on air quality and other research projects there. So take it away, Sarah and Tracy.
Okay, well, this is Sarah. So I'm going to be talking first, and then Tracy will take a turn. I'll let you know, I'll preface my comments by letting you know that my advice is based in part on advice I've given and discussions I've had with early career faculty through my role as a leader of the Early Career Geoscience Faculty Workshop. And I'll be talking a little bit more about what that is later if you're not familiar with it. The advice I'm going to be giving today is also based in part on the experiences that I had and the support that I received when I was a junior faculty member myself. I was tenured in 2013, and so it's at least somewhat fresh in my memory, the whole process. And I received a lot of support and great advice from the chairs in my department and mentors that were assigned to me within my department. And so I think one thing that I want to say before I even show my slides as a takeaway for all of you as department heads and chairs is really to think of your role as a support role and you know, trying to give the faculty the tools and feedback that they need to succeed. And you know, this is a separate role from the evaluation where, you know, you may have criticisms or whatnot, but just to think of yourselves as providing whatever tools the faculty member may lack and any feedback that they need, both critical and, you know, and helpful, you know, critical and helpful feedback for them to succeed as a faculty member. Okay, so if you could go ahead and move to the next slide, please. Okay, so I've grouped these under three sort of main categories. So the first one is I've called Connect. And in this category, it's mostly about helping the early career faculty member to develop a network of support. And so in that, you know, many departments already have something that I have in the second bullet point, which is assigning them a mentor who's a member of the senior faculty within the same department that the faculty member is in. But it also means to consider the fact that not just one person's going to be able to fill all of the mentoring needs that an early career faculty member may have. So there will be you know, try to assign them an official mentor, but also try to help them find other mentors who may fill different roles that will help them navigate their early career time. So then the third bullet point that I have on there is, as a chair, you can also act as an additional mentor. And I was really fortunate in my department when I was a junior faculty member, and that my chair was very proactive, very honest. Sometimes I didn't always you know, react favorably to the advice, but gave me very concrete, very specific advice, very helpful feedback, in addition to getting that feedback from my senior faculty mentor who was assigned to me. And I would encourage each of you then to do this in a very specific fashion. So, you know, make sure to meet with them regularly and, you know, actually, you know, ask them for their most recent CV, any other materials, and go through specifics. Try to be as specific as you can, be as helpful as you can, be as critical, provide as much feedback as you can on every aspect that you know they will be evaluated on in their evaluations. And yeah, and don't be afraid to be critical about that as well. You know, one other thing that some of the that my mentor did, my chair did, and other senior faculty did was offer to proofread and edit proposals and so forth, and that was very helpful. Encouraging them to seek advice and support elsewhere, and that includes other colleagues in the same departments. something that I didn't really take advantage of, but I think would probably be helpful, would be to seek seek peers at their same institution, but in different departments. So other early career faculty who are going through processes, but in different departments, that would be a useful network for early career faculty to tap into. Senior colleagues at other institutions, people who are in their specific field who can provide that field-specific advice that you may not have within your department, but that they can get that advice from senior colleagues that they know and are comfortable with at other institutions. And then just peers at other institutions, so tapping into networks of other early career faculty who are at other institutions to compare notes, discuss what strategies have been helpful for them, and so forth. Former advisors certainly can be a useful source of advice and support, and friends and family are maybe something that we might not think about naturally, but they would be helpful in providing the emotional support that they need to go through the process. And then in order to help with this sort of connecting them with other mentors and other sources of advice and support, there's a mentoring map, which is on the next slide, that kind of helps them categorize and think about who might be helpful for them as mentors in their career. So that you can guide them as a chair, you can guide them through thinking about who would be helpful to provide different sources of support. But this mentoring map actually has categories for them to think about who can fill certain roles in. So let's go ahead and move to the next slide. So this next slide then shows this mentoring map, and this is from the facultydiversity.org website, and I think Tracy's going to be talking about that a little bit later. But you can see there's a number of different categories on here, and some of these may be more useful than others for for your early career faculty. But to have them think about who can provide them with substantive feedback, whether it's, and I'm starting kind of in the upper left-hand corner, whether it's departmental colleagues, readers, that means people who can read their work, and that's actually on a different part of the page as well. Professional editor, that's not something I've ever used, but that might be appropriate for some fields. But some, people who can help them by providing substantive feedback on the intellectual aspects of their work. Sponsorship, that's sort of who can help, nominate them for awards, this kind of thing, introduce them to the greater community. So that, there's a category for that. Also access to opportunities, and this can be a variety of people, internal mentors, external mentors, peer mentors who can provide them to access to opportunities, maybe suggesting their name as an editor for a journal or something along those lines. People who can open doors, suggesting them to be on committees that may be helpful for their career, these kinds of opportunities that having that person advocate for the early career faculty can sort of help them get into those opportunities. Then accountability for what really matters, that's sort of in the friends and family category, who it is who you can really just talk to and bare your soul to without worrying about evaluation aspects. Bottom left is role models. Who are the people who would be their role models? If they don't know them already, they might think about contacting them and getting in touch with them to get to know them. Bottom right-hand corner, safe space. This is along the lines of accountability for what really matters. Just who are the individuals with whom you feel the person feels safe with. Moving, kind of continuing, I guess I've been going counterclockwise. Intellectual community, these are people who can provide substantive feedback on writing. Depending on the needs of the early career faculty member, it may be someone who has a lot of experience with writing grant proposals, but that's not always the case. I know when I was a graduate student, I was not involved in that process as well. And so it was very helpful for me to have members of my department who volunteered to help read my drafts of grant proposals, because while I had experience writing papers, I hadn't had the proposal writing experience, and it's a very different type of writing. And those percentages are just, who would you have help read your first, the very early drafts, that's the 0 to 25%, and then, the others are just the percent completion. Emotional support, that is again friends and family and other, and then finally the category of professional development. Who are those people that you know, can help them get known within their profession? Okay, so I guess, yeah, we can move on to the next slide. Thank you. So that's all in the category of connecting the early career faculty member. And the next category that I have here is community. And I think for me this has been really helpful within my department in that I feel that it is a community, a welcoming community, and I have felt and still feel very supported by my department. And so any way that you as a department head or chair can encourage an atmosphere of community within the department and among junior and senior faculty, anything that you can think of that would work for your department in that regard would be helpful. And so examples of this, so providing opportunities for social mingling amongst junior and senior faculty. You know, this will be different for different types of departments, but we always have a wine and cheese gathering after our seminars, and this just provides those sort of informal opportunities for people to talk. Encourage faculty get-togethers at conferences. I know early in my career it was really helpful for me to sit down with my senior faculty during a conference just over lunch or something like this, just to touch base with them. In our department, sometimes faculty just gather together either for coffee in the morning or lunch, and so any way that you can facilitate that kind of sense of community within the department. Helping them externally as well with the community, introducing them to colleagues at conferences. You know, I know my mentor did this, and it was just extremely helpful to me. She knew my field pretty well, and she knew some of the people in that field, so she had that inside scoop to sort of think, oh, Sarah should meet this person, and that was very helpful for me. Then the last thing I have on here is something that maybe as department chairs or heads we don't have a lot of ability to do, but I think affordable on-campus daycare is something for early career faculty that can really make life a lot easier. And if there's any way as a department chair, if this ever comes in your sphere of influence, I think supporting efforts within the university for on-campus daycare really can make life so much easier for early career faculty who have children. Okay, so then I guess we can go on to the next slide. Okay, so this one I called shelter. And so by this I mean sort of shielding the junior faculty from things like committee assignments, service, and not just shielding, but making sure that the committee assignments and service that they do is appropriate for their level, and also in some cases it can be helpful for them. So I know that as a junior faculty member, my department chair did not ask me to do serve on lots of committees. It was really helpful in that respect. The committees that I did eventually serve on were ones that were helpful for me. So one example of that is being on a graduate admissions committee. So, you know, early career faculty need to commonly need to have graduate students, and then sort of being part of that process will help them, you know, seek out and hopefully obtain good graduate students. Seminar coordinator, this is one that's a lot of work, but it's something that again means that the early career faculty who is a seminar coordinator is making connections with every visiting speaker, and so that can be helpful for them, and it also becomes very visible within the department. Advising the early career faculty member on teaching obligations and helping them to minimize or tailor their teaching in ways that are useful for them. So this will be fairly individualized, and it's important to discuss this with the early career faculty. But examples of this would be, for example, for them to teach graduate level classes in their field. This will, you know, this may, for many of us, this is maybe a slightly easier form of teaching. It helps us keep on top of the literature, and then it's also helpful for getting early graduate students up to speed on the literature as well. So it's useful not only for their teaching requirements, but also other aspects of their career. I know some individuals who have received teaching relief at the beginning of their faculty position, and that's one option. Another thing that is maybe a little bit less common, but I had, which I found really helpful, is in the semester that was leading up to my submission of my tenure package, I was granted teaching relief, and that was really helpful for me to sort of finish pushing through the papers that I really wanted to get published before I had to submit my tenure package. So that was helpful for me. Providing guidance on student mentoring and advising, and this is mostly just sort of communicating with them about the students, their students' progress. When it is admission cycle, talking with them about how many students they're considering admitting, just providing advice and feedback on, oh, you know, that's probably too many students for this department or for you at this stage in your career, or you should be looking for more, or, you know, well, I know you don't have research funding right now, but there may be teaching assistantships available, so this kind of discussion with them. And providing early resources to ensure they get off to a good start. So, for example, if, you know, part of that could be, you know, saying, well, that there would be teaching assistantships available for them until they're able to get grant funding for research assistantships and so forth. That's that slide, and I have a question here. Okay, so I guess the next slide that I have up here is resources. So I have a few resources, and I know Tracy has resources as well. And I've been involved with the Early Career Geoscience Faculty Workshop, and this is sponsored by the On the Cutting Edge program. And so what you see on your screen right now is a snapshot of the website for the On the Cutting Edge program, specifically their web page for early career geoscience faculty, and the link is there as well. And this has a lot of advice for early career faculty to be thinking about the things that early career faculty need to be thinking about, how to budget their time, how to develop their research program, getting tenure, making different choices, teaching. There's just a lot of resources available on this page that I think can be valuable for early career to peruse and think about when early on in their career. And then the next slide has specifically the workshop, that's the Early Career Geoscience Faculty Workshop. And I participated in this workshop in 2006, which was right before I started my faculty position. And I found it incredibly helpful just in terms of thinking about organizing my career and planning my career, and thinking about teaching and thinking about research and thinking about all, you know, writing grant proposals and all their priorities and all of the things that we have to think of as faculty members. This workshop takes people, you know, from a whole range of different types of institutions, from two-year colleges, four-year colleges without graduate programs, ones with graduate programs, and it offers advice and counseling and discussion and interaction and tools for early career faculty on all those fronts. So I do encourage you as department chairs to help support faculty, early career faculty, to go to this workshop. There are registration fees, and I know that a number of departments support faculty attending this workshop. It's offered, so far it's been offered every summer, and there's a visit to NSF on the very last day, so that also allows them to interact with and meet program managers, and you know, to introduce themselves to their program managers. So I know we've already gone through the cycle for this year, but you know, applications are advertised in the winter, and the deadline is in the spring, and then it generally has been happening each year in the summer. So I think that's the last slide that I have here. Is that right? Yeah. So I don't know, Tracy, did you want to take over?
Sure, thanks, Sarah. My comments will really, I think, dovetail very nicely with Sarah's big picture advice, which I completely agree with on all points. And I'm speaking today from my personal experience as a professor at the University of Wisconsin, but also with my hat on as the president of the Earth Science Women's Network, which is a free network for women in all fields of the geoscience. And we've been around for about over 10 years. And in 2013, there was an analysis of our group and a survey of many of our members conducted by Tim Archie and Sandra Larson at the University of Colorado at Boulder with support from the National Science Foundation. And I will be presenting some of the results of this survey to highlight the statistics really about what early career faculty are going through and how different individuals may be perceiving a situation differently, perhaps differently than other generations of scientists in your department, perhaps differently based on their background or home conditions. And just to narrate what you're looking at here, these were survey results where the light blue represents the answers from women who were members of the Earth Science Women's Network. These are mostly early career women, including graduate students, postdocs, pre-tenure faculty members, and a few post-tenure and permanent scientists. And the darker blue is men who are members of the Earth Science Jobs Network. This is a jobs list that is hosted by the National Center for Atmospheric Research and managed by ESWN. So one way to think about this is that they're men and women who are all at the early career stage across a range of geoscience fields. And one of the questions that I thought was, really helpful to be framing what is going on at home outside of work that may be affecting performance and decision making at work is, what are the responsibilities that this person has to take account of? And what we found is that nearly 60% of the women in our survey were responsible for household upkeep if they lived with a partner, and about 50% were responsible for the parenting. And so this is, some men were as well. Of course, over 20% of the men were mostly responsible for the household, and about 10% were mostly responsible for the parenting. But I think in terms of mentoring and supporting junior faculty, this comes back to trying to understand the big picture and appreciate that what worked for you may or may not be a good fit for the candidate that you're helping to mentor. You can move on to the next slide. Part of this is also how the junior faculty member is perceiving the workplace climate. And in this graph, the numbers represent how strongly they agree with certain statements that the survey put forward. So again, the light blue is well, in this one actually it's changed a little bit, but here the light blue is the men and the darker blue is the women. But the comment whether they feel isolated in their work unit, and women were more likely to agree with that statement. Whether they fit in with their work unit, and men were more likely to agree with that statement. Whether they feel that they work harder than their colleagues, and women were more likely to agree with that. Whether they felt reluctant to speak up in different contexts, women were more likely to agree with that. And whether they felt that there were some unwritten rules of the game, and women were more likely to agree with that. So basically, for the kind of negative comments about the workplace climate and how they fit into the workplace, women were more likely to agree, and with the positive comments, men were more likely to agree. And this is a perception, but it's a perception that's affecting how women and men are engaging with their department and engaging in their work and moving toward tenure. And I'll just make one note on the unwritten rules issue, is that I've been working with the American Geophysical Union on some of the issues around the honors process. And I think that we've been working to try to make some of those processes more clear and more transparent, because most underrepresented groups, studies have shown, benefit from having the rules written, having clarity and expectations. And so a lot of the societies, including AGU, are trying to move in that direction. Next slide, please. Another aspect where gender may play a role in the experience of junior faculty members is in the perceptions of gender bias. And here again, the light blue is men and the darker blue is women, and the x-axis represents how much the respondents disagreed or agreed with the statements. And in terms of whether do men and women have equal attention at professional meetings, and more men agreed with this than women. Quite a big difference, actually. Are there collegial opportunities for women to the same degree that there are for men? And more men agreed with this. Do women have equal lab access? And more men thought yes, and more of the women disagreed. Is there sexual discrimination? Here the men didn't think so much, and the women felt that that was a bigger issue. Whether men were more likely to receive advice relevant to their professional careers. Again, this was an issue where the women thought that men did have an advantage, although the men did not perceive that advantage. Whether men get preferential treatment in a work environment, the women thought yes, the men thought less so. And I'm not saying yes, it was still less than 2. I'm just looking at the relative differences. Remarks about other groups. Sexist remarks, again, an issue where the women thought it was more of an issue, and a condescending attitude toward women was one that women perceived. So there's really a difference in the perception of gender issues among early career faculty, with men perceiving things as more equal than women perceive things to be. As there are more junior women make up a larger share of the early career faculty in the geosciences than they do the senior faculty. So you're often in a situation where the mentors are primarily men, and many more of the junior faculty are more likely to be women. So I think that being aware of these differences in perception can help navigate some discussions and make sure that the junior candidate feels listened to and feels like their mentors are actually on the same page. If you can move to the next slide, please. Now here what we're comparing is not men and women, but the role of personal responsibilities in the career process. And these 2 charts show the same 2 questions. The first is whether personal responsibilities and commitments have slowed down my career progress. And the second question is, I often have to forego professional activities because of personal responsibilities. And what we see is that this idea of personal responsibilities impeding professional advancement plays a much bigger role for respondents who were, and both of these are the women in ESWN, so this is just women. But it plays a much bigger role for women who are married or partnered than not married or partners, and it plays a much bigger role among women who have caretaking responsibilities versus women who have no caretaking responsibilities. So just again to kind of broaden out this picture of who these junior candidates are and what they're facing. Next slide, please. So the differences aside, really all junior faculty are facing many of the same barriers. And I think it's helpful for their mentors to step back and kind of put themselves back in that place and thinking about what some of the barriers are that your junior colleagues may be experiencing. And some of these are familiar, such as the challenge of building a research program, getting a lab set up, grant writing, managing a research group. This was something that Sarah mentioned where it was really helpful to have the editing from colleagues and mentors on grants. I think this issue of managing a research group is an issue that doesn't get as much attention because none of us in graduate school take management classes. But maybe we should, because new faculty, especially where research is a big part of their activity, are being asked to manage budgets and to make hiring decisions and maybe faced with some personnel issues that they've never had experience with. And even in the classroom, management is a big part of setting a tone, establishing authority, providing critical feedback. So there's a lot of issues that, that junior faculty have to face that they've never been trained in. Teaching expectations is also sometimes a challenge, determining how hard to make a new course dealing with difficult students, or establishing authority in the classroom. And this idea of establishing authority in the classroom is also one of these issues that may have a gender component as well. When it comes to dealing with difficult students, I remember talking to one of my mentors when I'd had a student who was unhappy with his grade, and he came to see me in my office and was just railing against how I must be a first-time professor because no established professor would ever give this grade that I had given him. And one of my mentors gave the advice to tell students that they should submit all complaints in writing. And that was really a lifesaver at the time, because it helps make sure that we have a written record of everything, and that then when students are, even if they are upset, that they put it in writing, and it gives them a chance to cool down. And it also makes sure that I can respond to them in a way that's clear-headed and what I want to say at the right time. Time management, this is a huge issue for junior faculty who may be moving from a postdoc or graduate school where they were focused solely on research to now having to balance the urgency of teaching, where there's deadlines, with the slow but critical process of writing a paper. Thinking about balancing tasks and committee work, and how do they make time for daily writing in the hubbub of a typical faculty activity. So there are some resources to support time management, but this is also something where I think mentors can play a role in helping to offer personal stories of how do they make time for their research, keeping mentees in the loop to help them maintain the idea that research, even though it may be take a while to get a paper published, that still is a very high priority activity as we move toward tenure. And then the last one is this idea of navigating university politics, and thinking about how to engage with senior colleagues who may be voting on you in the future, when to say yes versus no to service, because this can be a difficult path when the junior candidates know that they don't want to be making enemies in the department. They don't want to be perceived as a bad sport or somebody who's not a team player. So all of these are issues that sometimes senior faculty who know the ropes can provide some good tips on. And also this idea of how to get candid advice from mentors while still ensuring or trying to ensure that mentors maintain a positive impression of the candidate. And part of this loops back to this mentoring map that Sarah mentioned. I often use that mentoring map when talking with junior colleagues and giving talks, because it really helps to think that as junior faculty are trying to make their way, that they need to reach out to different types of contacts for different needs. And one part of this from the university politics perspective is that idea of a sponsor. And one way I've heard a sponsor described is somebody who is controlling the discussion about the candidate when the door is shut. And so, just making the candidate aware of how to be building productive relationships that are going to pay off in the evaluation process, even when they're not in the room. Next slide, please. A lot of the things that we've been talking about are really for the benefit of the faculty candidate. What can help support an individual through this process. But I think it's important to remember that the mentoring process, whether it's formal or informal, also involves the senior faculty acting as agents of the university. And there are a lot of laws related to employment that play a role in how that process needs to move along. And I'm not an employment lawyer, but my dad is, and I've talked with him a lot about these issues and about some of the guidelines that faculty need to be aware of, that they need to have some clear standards, there needs to be candid and regular feedback, this idea of equitable treatment of all candidates. This is something that can be very difficult for a university to ensure when from a fixed set of senior faculty, one junior candidate may get Professor A, B, and C for their mentors, and a different candidate may get Professors X, Y, and Z for their mentors. And it's really difficult to assure that both of those junior candidates are getting the same quality of mentoring. But this is something that does, fall to the chair, and is something to be aware of, that there are some legal issues surrounding equitable mentoring of candidates, and this idea of having written records. And I think this is a helpful as a management suggestion for junior candidates, that when they are working with their own graduate students or their own postdocs, to try to maintain written records, but also for the mentors personally, that it's helpful for everybody involved to have a record, because the tenure process is many years long, and sometimes it can, people's memories can differ as to what was said at the third-year review or something like that. Next slide, please. So just to end with a couple more resources akin to Sarah, she mentioned this facultydiversity.org. The National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity is a spectacular resource. That's where we got those mentoring maps. But they also have a faculty success program. I think it's about $5,000, but I did not participate in the program, but I know many people who have, and they've all given it rave reviews. And it can be good for faculty who are just starting out, but it can also be good at that third-year review if you have a junior assistant professor in your department who you feel like needs something, but you're not sure what they need. Enrolling them in the faculty success program may be the right thing. It really emphasizes research productivity, how to achieve goals, how to make sure the publications are getting out, and doing so in a collaborative, emotionally supportive environment. Next slide, please. There's also some resources out there that are specifically for chairs and heads and chairs and tenured faculty on how to make sure that the tenure process is moving along in a way that is consistent with legal and ethical standards. So in terms of making sure that you're checking the boxes and dotting the I's for employment law issues, this may be a helpful resource. And then one last slide is I'll just end with the Earth Science Women's Network. I mentioned that this is a free network that any women can join, and we have about 3,000 members working in over 50 different countries, and this is one way for women to be building their professional networks and also be receiving some of that kind of more you can do it and peer support advice that also can reduce feelings of isolation. So I'll end here so that we have plenty of time for questions.
Great. Thank you so much to both Sarah and Tracy for your wonderful presentations. Right now we're going to enter into the discussion portion of our webinar, and I will go ahead and moderate any questions coming in. We do have a few from the audience that we'd like to start off with. As I look here, there's a question for Sarah. One individual says that she has 2 faculty members of color who are traditionally underrepresented, and she was wondering how else can she help support these early career faculty, and do you have any suggestions for that? Oh,
Okay.
there you are. Can you start again?
Yeah, sure, sorry. So I don't have specific resources with respect to faculty of color, although I'm wondering, maybe Tracy knows, does the faculty diversity website have those kinds of resources?
Yes, it absolutely does. In fact, actually, the National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity is led by Carrie Ann Rockamore, who herself is a woman of color and also specializes, her training was in sociology related to racial identity. So I have met many faculty of color who have participated in her programs. They serve everybody, men, women, every background, every discipline, every race, of course, but I do believe that it is especially well suited for supporting faculty of color because it's even designed by a woman who that is her background and academic expertise. And I'll just note that, sorry, I just wanted to add that center also has trained speakers, and they can give on-campus talks about succeeding as a pre-tenure faculty. And I've had them come to the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and we've hired them for a number of different workshops through ESWN, and you know, it's excellent. And I say that I have no stake in the company, I have no financial gain here, but I've heard Carrie-Ann Rockamore talk many times, and she's very dynamic and inspirational, and at this point actually she doesn't do the talking anymore. She has a trained portfolio of speakers who can address these issues, so it's not just the faculty success program, they actually have a pretty wide suite of different resources for faculty support.
That's great. I guess I can just add to that I think, you know, having conversations with all faculty members about what obstacles they fear or they are concerned about, you know, asking them about their concerns. You know, faculty of color, you can specifically ask them if they feel there are any specific concerns that they have, you know, just to open the conversation, perhaps help them identify mentors who may be facing similar concerns to kind of get them keyed into other people who might be able to help them.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. We have another question that asks, did either of your department chairs help you create relationships with college administrators, especially when you were coming up for tenure?
There wasn't any, so this is Sarah. I did not have any specific activities that were done by my department chair. We did have a departmental-wide visit by the dean, and every faculty member had their share of time to sort of describe their research and so forth. So I think that's really the only thing that I had, but I think that's an excellent idea.
Okay. Now, there is a follow-up question. Did you get to serve on a college committee that gave you a little bit more visibility in the dean's office, or how did that work?
I'll just answer to say that I did get a lot of exposure to upper level administrators as a junior faculty. Part of that was that I was hired through an interdisciplinary cluster hire, and then I was in an interdisciplinary institute, and my mentor, who was the chair of my mentoring committee and the director of my research center, and I'll just say his name is John Foley. He's now at the California Academy of Sciences, and he was really an excellent, excellent mentor. Made an effort to help me connect with different departments and with different opportunities on campus. Of course, that comes at a price. A lot of the most engaging and high-profile opportunities are the ones that take the most time. But I was on hiring committees, multiple hiring committees actually, as an assistant professor, and involved in other types of, you know, big picture strategic planning activities. And I think that figuring out the right mix of this is important because they can take a lot of time. On the other hand, they can make the junior faculty feel invested in the institution, feel part of the process, and feel listened to. And, you know, in fact, I gave a talk similar to this at the 2014 Heads and Chairs AGU, AGI meeting in San Francisco. And before I went, I was talking to our then provost and asked him if he had any advice on mentoring junior faculty. And he said that oftentimes the sort of common wisdom of totally protecting your junior faculty and keeping them cloistered away in their offices ends up being counterproductive because the junior faculty can feel disengaged and like they're not quite part of the institution yet. So I really liked the way that Sarah approached that in her slide, saying that, you know, there's a difference between sheltering a candidate and isolating the candidate, and I think that's a really important distinction that needs to be made strategically with the interests of the candidate in mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll add something.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll add something from my experience. On our campus, the advanced program is present, and so this is present on a number of campuses in the U.S., and it's designed to help promote women's advancement within academia. And I bring it up in part because it is a resource that may be available on some campuses, but also because they sponsored a meeting for early career faculty with, it wasn't the dean of my college, but it was a dean in the administration who was responsible for promotions packages. And he came and he spoke, and it was a small, small seminar room with maybe 15 of us sitting around a table. And it gave us the opportunity to speak directly with him, and he was very candid and open about the process. And we had the opportunity to meet with him, but also to hear about the process from him and hear his advice, and that was extremely helpful for me. Just understanding my university system.
Great. We have one small question. Are there any other climate studies that are published that someone can read about that you know of?
Well, I know that different universities have conducted their own climate studies on campus. And I know that the AGI does work about workforce and things like that.
We do.
Yeah, and so maybe Carolyn and others may comment on that. But I think that one thing that's unique about these data that I gave you for ESWN is that they cut across all fields of the geoscience and really look at this some of these perceptions of biases and perceptions of barriers. And we were conducting this work to evaluate how an organization like ESWN was making progress to, decrease feelings of isolation and increase feelings of empowerment and things like that. So some of these results we were kind of surprised at. But there are some results that came out of that study that really haven't been reported other places, and especially related to, harassment and bias and other things that I didn't talk about here. But that report from, but I think that there are other ones out there, and AGI may be able to comment as well.
So I actually did a study, this is Heather, back in 2012 with funding from the National Science Foundation through OEDG, which is Opportunities for Enhancing Diversity in the Geosciences. And we held a professional development workshop for traditionally underrepresented geoscientists pursuing careers in academia. And so you can see we have resources available from that study and from that workshop, which I can post here to the audience with a link to view some of the data and some of the outcomes from that workshop. So that might be of interest to some along this point as well as along the diversity perspective. For now, are there any other questions coming in from the audience? Ooh, we got one. We have a question about working with early career faculty. How can you have early career faculty mentor graduate students? And as a department head, this is one area that they find that their early career faculty really struggle with. Do you have any comments on that?
First of all, I think it's a really good observation because it comes back to this management issue that I mentioned earlier, that working with graduate students and mentoring graduate students requires a lot of understanding about, the management process. And I think that just talking about it and sharing tips, sharing advice, maybe having, discussions within the department or bringing in, outside experts can really have a small investment pay off, because once the conversation gets started, then the junior faculty know who to ask, and that it's okay to be talking about some of these issues, and that that the conversation channels are open. I'll say that when I was a junior faculty, one of my appointments is in civil and environmental engineering, and one of the senior professors in the department hosted all of us junior women to attend a Women in Management seminar with her. And this was not specific to academia at all. We had members of a local bank and members of a local insurance company and those of us professors, and it was a wide mix. But much of the advice on management was completely appropriate for mentoring graduate students as much as it would be in any other context, trying to understand what the goals are, having milestones, clear expectations, a clear review process, and providing candid feedback and having a written record. And so a lot of the things that I've mentioned in this context as management concepts that the department chair should be aware of to mentor the junior faculty are also management concepts that the junior faculty should be aware of to mentor the graduate students. And they're not, it's not rocket science, but it is something that I think a lot of people can view as just, you know, unnecessary or wasted time. But having some of these sort of standard processes laid out for a first-time advisor, a first-time manager, can make a big difference.
And I'll pick up on that a little bit. We do a number of activities with the early career faculty at the Early Career Geoscience Faculty Workshop, and one of them that I'll just touch on is what Tracy was mentioning about expectations. And I think, you know, it's something that department chairs can do with their early career faculty before their first student walks in the door, is have them write up just a summary of their lab practices and their expectations of the students, and maybe discuss that with them so that they have, you know, expectations of the students that are in line with what their department expects, and then that faculty member can then, you know, have the discussion with their student about those expectations and help, and in that way the chair can help the faculty member get off to hopefully a good start in mentoring their graduate students.
Fantastic. We have time for one more question that came in. Along those lines, do you know of any other good outside experts that one of our faculty member, audience members could invite to his or her department to talk about some of these early career mentoring ideas?
Yeah. So I think that the question is partly what the goal is of the conversation and how big of a group it is. I think that having, you know, senior people within your own university come or even not so senior folks who are viewed as effective mentors, who are viewed as effective teachers or really successful grant writers, having them come and just share their experiences helps build the capacity on campus so that the junior faculty know who to ask questions to, and gets the conversation started. If you want a slightly bigger and more formal activity, there are a number of different groups. The American, there's a chemical organization, a bunch of chemistry professors started a training program that has some sort of pre-made modules, and I'm blanking on the name of it, but it's not just for chemists. They offer it in different departments, but it came from a group of chemists who felt that some of these professional skill building modules were lacking, and so they developed them and then offer them as classes. The ESWN, we have run a number of different workshops both at AGU and for two-day workshops. And for our AGU workshops that are held every year, we bring in a panel of experts and then have them answer questions and discuss their experiences. And, you know, that's a pretty easy mechanism to put together that has a high impact. When we have a more structured two-day seminar, one of the people that we often turn to is a consultant out of Boston named Chris Olex, and she has a lot of experience doing management training and skill building and workshop facilitation around different issues related to, she's not just a scientist, she's not a scientist at all, but she ran some skill building workshops at the Discourse postdoc training workshop in Puerto Rico, and she worked with a lot of different clients, and she's worked with our ESWN members a lot. And so our typical workshops have Carrie Ann Rockamore or somebody from her organization and Chris Olex from Boston. And both of them are more participatory and get the participants talking about these issues, thinking about these issues, making personal plans on how they'll attack some of these challenges. So that's more something where it may be a half a day or a full day workshop with a professional versus just bringing in some experts and having maybe an hour seminar, but something for Q&A and questioning. And I think both or any are great. I think just getting the conversation started and making also the junior faculty feel like that these are worthy topics to think about and to spend time on.